A follow-up video on the differences between the P3 color space and the Adobe RGB 1998. If you viewed the previous one, I am using this application called Color Think, and it allows us to visualize the different working color spaces in their 3D volumes. So that is what we're seeing here. Now, one problem with viewing in this 3D visualization is that you don't quite get a good sense of what's happening at the different L star levels. So ColorThink allows you to do an option where you can slice through these different levels to get a sense of, okay, what's happening at different L star levels. What I'm going to do is simply turn on this slicer option and go into the 2D mode. Okay, so just remember that the red is the P3. And I've done that specifically to help to distinguish it from the Adobe RGB that is rendered in true color here. That's the way they say it. Okay, so for instance, I'll switch to Adobe RGB, and this one here is the Adobe RGB. The wider one is P3. And if I wanted, you can see, I'll just render that in true color. And that's what it'll do. So I'm going to go back. Here's what the point I was trying to make is that look at this L star slider. So literally it will slice through those volumes that we just showed and show you for that particular L star level, what the color gamut is for each of those. So I'm on the P3. I'm going to go back to a single color just to help distinguish that in a little better sense. So let me activate that. It should have done it. There we go. Okay. So it's a little touchy. Nevertheless, you can see, okay, at L star 97 at the high lightness values, the P3 is quite good, especially in these, remember, in the yellows, the light greens, etc. Okay, so let's keep slicing down. And as expected, the P3 generally is much better in those high L star levels. But as we move down, you'll see, okay, in this particular L star range, the Adobe RGB is slightly better in these aquas, the light greens. And so we'll just keep slicing down. And you can see that, especially in the greens, the Adobe RGB has a wider response. But look at the P3 up here. It's in these oranges, light greens, let's see, yellows, it is doing a much better job. So this is just an instructional video on how these color gamuts are sliced and what particular colors at each L star level are then described. Here again, these are the reds of the P3 out here. What's this? These are the magentas. These are all descriptive colors, of course. So I'll just keep moving down as we get into the very dark areas. So this is just meant as an instructional video of how these different working color spaces perform at different L star levels. Now, before I leave, it would be instructive to show, okay, so how do these working color spaces, how do they correlate or compare to actual colors that we're familiar with? What I'm going to do, we're going to go back to 3D space. I'm going to click off this slicer and we'll go back to our originals. And just for ease of viewing, I'm going to click off the Adobe RGB. I'm going to turn it back into true color. Okay, so there we go. That's this is the P3. Now, what I have here, I've also shown, I've populated the application with all the colors of the color checker SG. That's a very familiar and popular test target. So let's see where those colors lie within the P3 working color space. And I'm going to click this on. You'll see there they are. Okay, so you can see some of them, these, and let me try to zoom in here. If I have done my zooming correct, there we go, there we go. I'm going to shift this over a bit, and you can see that especially in these, there's a couple of colors, outliers, that don't do very well in the P3 color space. Nevertheless, all the reds are doing well. I'm going to click off that one, click on the Adobe RGB, and you can see that most of those blues are contained within the Adobe RGB, but as expected, there is one outlier. There's red. And let's see, are there any more out here? Oh, it's just like a little search. Oh, there's a couple of oranges in that color checker SG that lie outside the Adobe RGB working color space. So I guess the conclusion here is that there's compromises and need to be aware of these.